What's up, guys? Out here playing with tires. So I got the 30-inch Mamba lights on the rZr. Looks a lot different than the 34.5s. Looks like it skipped leg day. They do stick out a little bit wider, despite these are the skinniest wheels you can buy for a 14. But that's just because forward focus wheels have a ridiculous amount of negative offset. But these are the perfect 14-inch wheels to run on portals. You can see they clear, the wheel itself clears the top of the portal bracket by about ½ an inch. And more importantly, the real hard thing to do is it clears the brake rotor by about ½ an inch. So you can see it right here. There you go. So yeah, not the rotor, the caliper. The problem is the bind on the calipers. In the rear calipers fit a little better, so they're nowhere close to hitting the caliper in the rear. And it clears the top of the portal bracket by a little bit more than1/4 of an inch, which is all the clearance you need. So that is the perfect wheel. And that, again, that's the Raceline Sedona Mamba 6+1, right? Beadlock, not 5+2, even though their 6+1 measures 5+2 and their 5+2 measures 4+3, but whatever. But yeah, so you want the 6+1 for this because it keeps it, it makes the bike 2 inches narrower, and it makes sure that portal box tucks into the wheel and you can't see it. We don't want to give away of portal boxes. We want to confuse people. Why is the axle going into the top of the wheel? I don't understand. It's starting to rain, but so I got those on there. In these rZrs, because the engine sits on the back wheel essentially, you got to run a little bit more PSI. So I'm running 10 in the front, 11.5 in the rear. Looks pretty good. Still has a good amount of ground clearance. I might adjust my preload a little bit because I don't need the extra clearance for these little tiny tires. But more importantly, I put the 34.5s back on the Honda. And I did get them to clear this time. Someone asked, so I did it. And I can drive it around, and I'm going to give you a few tips to clear massive tires on these bikes. So the offset is key. I'm running 1.5-inch spacers in the back, which centers the wheel right inside this like cutout right here, right? You get this big cutout. You want the wheel centered right there. So 1.5-inch wheel spacers in the back of the Ford Focus rims, 1-inch wheel spacers in the front. That makes it just about an inch wider than the factory at the outside of the tire, and it gives you a little bit of steering. So yeah, that's one trick, is get your offset just right. Another trick is to put the tire PSI as low as you can get it. I'm running 2.5 pounds in each tire, which makes them real soft, which is good because this is a light bike, and it helps me clear them. More traction and everything. Okay, third trick is trimming. You can see I've trimmed a ton. This is trimmed a little bit extra. This is from when I had the 34.5s on the Catboast lift. And I got some questions with the Catboast lift lately. The Catboast lift makes it a lot wider, and because of that, when your tire swings, it's going to swing a little bit different. It's not going to tuck into the wheel well as much because it's wider. So I had to trim my plastics to run 31 skinnies with the Catboast lift. I did not have to trim my plastics to run 31 skinnies bone stock. And so the Catboast lift's a great lift. It gives you great ground clearance. The ride is still very good, very stable. But do not buy the Catboast lift if you want to clear bigger tires. Buy it because you want, the extra 4 or 5 inches more ground clearance, which it makes a huge difference. It's well worth the money. Another question I get is, why don't you like 32.5 Outlaws? Why aren't you running those? Because that seems like the perfect size for a Rubicon, right? Well, they are a perfect size, but they're a balloon tire. A 32.5 on a 14-inch wheel is just too much tire to wheel ratio. It floats really bad on a Honda. And if you look at a 32.5 Outlaw, it was designed for a bike that can't spin big tires. It was designed for the mall crawlers who want to put 32 halves on a belt drive and not do gear reduction or portals. It was designed for, it's designed to be able to turn. It's not designed to give you the most amount of traction possible. My buddy runs them on his 300 and it does great. It's a great tire for a 300, right? A 300 is only 300 cc's. It needs a tire that's easy to turn. But if you look at the tread on this, see how it comes and it scoops? This is the traction building surface. That's why a V-tread that's all at this angle builds so much pulling power. That's why tractors use them, right? Tracked literally means pull, tractor. So this scoop right here is what really gives you a lot of traction. Look at 32.5, it doesn't do this. It stays tapered like a Mudzilla. They're designed to be easy to spin. They have huge tread spacing, so they clean out pretty well, but they just spin too much. I had on my 500 Foreman with a 35% gear reduction, and I could spin 32.5-inch Outlaws significantly easier than I could spin 31 wides. I would say the 32.5 Outlaws were even easier to spin than 31 skinny wide, just because the tread isn't scooped as much. So that's why I don't like 32.5 Outlaws. They spin too much, and they float too much. So I'll never buy another set of them. I ran them on a 300 and it did pretty good. I ran them crushed. Terrible tire crushed. So the novices just aren't aggressive enough. Crushed, they just spun and spun and spun. I actually ended up putting on the crush locks and selling them like that because I was just so underimpressed with how much they pulled. They look great, you get good ground clearance, but if you need maximum traction, they're not the tire. Okay, another few little tricks to clear big tires on the Rubicon. So this is kind of a secret, but you see the two 12s down there? Those two 12s? And the two 12 bolt nuts right there? If you loosen those up and put a floor jack under the bike, it's raining, let me get back out into the garage, but loosen up those 4 12s, put a floor jack, you can lever up that floorboard support about an inch. And what that does is it gets it up and away from the wheel, and it also brings your floorboards up. It's going to kind of adjust how the plastics sit on the bike, but it's really not that big of a deal. I like to loosen up the bolts. You got the little Allen bolt and nut right there. If you loosen this up, when you do that, it'll let the plastics readjust and they'll all fit on there pretty nice still. So that's one trick. Another trick is you can actually slide your floorboards back on the bracket an inch. So you see all those holes drilled here and here? That's because you drill 2 holes and then you move this back an inch, bolt that back down, and that gives you a bunch of clearance on the front. Now I didn't do that right now because I'm rubbing front and rear. Some tires, if you're running wider wheel offsets, the back will never start to rub with the front wheels. So that's a good way to get you some extra clearance for your front there without having to trim as much as I did. Right now I have it trimmed so much it's not really beneficial because I cut away all the plastic that would be rubbing anyways. But I have the 3.5 inch stretch I could put on here. So if I put the 3.5 inch rear stretch and then I move the plastics back another inch, I would have no rubbing whatsoever, right? But then you can see where this bar is kind of shiny because it's getting rubbed. So that bar, I would have to either take it off and put a different bend in it, which would be pretty easy to do, or just make an aftermarket or a homemade floorboard support. Highlifter sells floorboard supports for the old Rubicons and stuff for that very reason, to get that bar farther away from the tires. But you can run 34.5 inch tires on a Rubicon. You just got to put them at low PSI, get the right wheel spacing, do a lot of trimming. You're going to be limited on your turning, right? Because right now if I turn real far, I hit my winch and the tire swings into that bar. But just for the record, I do have about 3 inches of rear lift because I'm running the TRX, the old Rubicon front shocks, and I got custom arms. So I've got about 3 inches of lift in the back and about 2.5 in the front. So I do have a little bit more than you would have with your Highlifter bracket lift. If you did the Highlifter bracket lift with some shock spring spacers, we'd have about the same setup as far as height goes. And yeah, granted, it's going to break axles like this for sure, but it looks cool. I'm just going to use it to putt around this weekend because I want to try these on the rZr. And I hate juggernauts, and I'm bored of all my other tires, so I'm going to try to run this setup this weekend. Plus, it'll pull some bitches. People will be interested in it. And it just looks amazing to have a 34.5, which is essentially taller than a 35-inch truck tire on an almost stock bike. I mean, that just looks so right to me. It just looks so good. So yeah, guys, it can be done. I'm not geared low enough to turn this right now. I'm only at a 15% primary, 12% secondary with a clutch kit. So I'll be able to spin in water and stuff, but mostly it's just going to be two-wheel drive creeping around mall crawling. And if you were to want to spin these, a 53% gear reduction would be plenty. That's what I had before, was a 35 and a 12, and I spun these, no problem. But I was explaining this to somebody a few days ago. You don't want to gear your bike too low. That's one of the worst things you can do. If you gear the bike too low, everyone says, oh yeah, I'll just gear it super low and I'll run in second gear. No, you won't. First gear on a Honda is considered a super low. They don't call it that anymore, but they used to. A super low means like first gear is your granny gear. The difference between first and second gear is like 100%. You would need a 100% gear reduction on a stock bike to make your second gear feel like your first gear did stock. And then once you put bigger tires, you still wouldn't be able to pull them in second gear in the thick stuff. So I don't care what anyone says about, oh, I'm going to put a 69, I'm just going to run and seg it in the mud. Sure, two-wheel drive maybe, but if you're riding real mud like I do, second gear is not going to cut it. You're going to be in first gear anyways. So you want to gear your bike perfectly so you can run in first gear and have enough torque to always spin your tires without bogging and making Honda look bad, but still have enough wheel speed to clean out your tires in the real thick stuff. So that's why I'm running a 27% right now, because I usually run like a 30 or 31 on this bike, which is perfect 27%. You don't want to gear your bike too low. With these, a 35% and a 12% secondary would be about perfect, right? If you do that, that's like, what, 47%? That would be about perfect. A 53% would be a hair low, but it'd probably still be fine. A 69% would probably really be too low with these tires, unless you're really just going to go, creep around in real thick mud. The only tire I'd recommend a 69% for is like a Mamba, because a Mamba literally works at 4 RPMs. You don't need to spin it fast at all. But yeah, I mean, it's doing pretty good. I'm going to put another Catboat on this bike eventually if I don't sell it and get a new one. And I still have that 3.5-inch stretch. It is for sale if anyone wants it, but if no one buys it, I might put it on here. It's got a 3.5-inch bracket stretch, and it's got a 3.5-inch drive shaft that was stretched by Jason Law, so it's a pretty legit stretch. What else? How else? Someone asked me some other questions about clearing these tires. Oh yeah, so axles. So I'm thinking about getting a set of stock link turners for this thing. just for shits and giggles, and so it'll be like, you know, bulletproof and stuff. But they don't handle heat very well, and I do have a pretty bad angle on them. Even with my Catvo Slift, which had a very reasonable angle, I still had a lot of heat issues with my Turner Eagles. But Turner has the Turner Eagle 2 Racing, and I've heard good things about it. I haven't tested it myself yet, but next Catvos kit I get or set of Turners, I'm going to get the Eagle 2 Racings for sure. But yeah, so I do break a lot of axles. With the stock, when I ran this bike stock height with 31 skinnies, never broke a single axle. I'm not sure it could be done. I beat on it really hard. But this lift kit I made is a little bit much, right? Because this isn't even full down travel right now, and the axle's already pretty bad at an angle. And I gave up on running Honda axles a little while ago because I got tired of rebuilding them on the trail, and they're so expensive. So these are both cheapo axles. Well, not completely. That's a Honda outer and a cheapo inner, but whatever. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to drill another hole for the shock to move the shock in right here. Or there's actually enough space where I could drill a hole and move it up to lower the bike about 1/2 inch. Because the problem is like not where it rides right now. It's the problem is my max down travel. So like when I dip off a hole and one tire still has like, you know, some traction on it, but the weight unloads from it, that's when I'm breaking axles. And I'm always breaking the outer cages. So I think if I lower this setup a little bit, I went a little crazy with it. I knew I'd break axles when I made it, but I wanted to max it out and see how close I could get it. But these arms just kill it. You can't beat that ground clearance right there. People try, but I haven't seen anyone make a set of arms for a stock Rubicon yet. These arms are definitely the shit. So ground clearance wise, even though we're only at 2.5 psi, still got right at 20 inches of ground clearance. Oh, actually, that's kind of bullshit. Let's get the phone lined up just right. Okay. Probably like 19.5 under the frame bar, which is definitely the lowest spot. So 19.5. When I had them at 10 psi, I was right at 20 inches. So that's 19.5 inches of ground clearance is pretty good on a bike running stock axles. That's another thing I don't think anyone's going to be able to beat. Challenge accepted. Show me a bike on stock axles that has 19.5 inches of ground clearance. But it's pretty awesome. Yeah, so I think that answers all the questions I've been getting about the 34.5s on the Rubicon.